I Found New Life on the Deep Web by u/Rinichiro. Remember when deep web stories were the fad? Every week, you'd find a new tale of someone going too far on the deep web, finding something terrible, and ending up getting attacked for speaking out against it. This story is a bit similar. The difference is, I still love the deep web. Let me explain. I was a senior in high school at that time, and I was definitely no popular kid. My friends were the oddities of the school, the few people who dared to defy the norm. It was them who told me about the deep web, a place on the internet where you are completely unwatched, anonymous, capable of doing whatever you want. And of course, I was intrigued. Most of my friends just used it to buy drugs, but I thought a little bigger. I wanted to know what happened in the darkest parts of the deep web, whether or not my friends were telling the truth when they talked about horrible fetish sites and assassins that you can hire to kill anyone you like. Of course, I wasn't planning on using any of it. I've never been particularly interested in sex, so those kind of sites don't interest me, and there's really nobody I'd like to kill. It was the mystery of it all that fascinated me. Going to these sites would be like peering into a side of the world only a few have ever seen, like a wholly new experience. At that time, I was tired of the monotony of life. I'd get up at the same time every day, go to school, attend the same classes, talk to the same people, go home, play some games, do homework, go to sleep, and then it would repeat. I wondered if other people got tired of that. Anyway, it took me a while to actually dive into the deep web. As fascinated as I was, I'd been warned of what could happen to me. I read the stories I talked about too. Who isn't afraid of being threatened by hackers or stalked by some creeps you piss off online? That kind of shit kept me from actually going on the deep web. Until the day that I manned up and decided that it was time to break the monotony. It was time to delve into the underbelly of the internet, and time to see a world that I had only dreamed of. For the first week or so, it was boring. It was just drug sites and stuff where people expose government secrets or whatever. Nothing as dark as I expected. I don't even do drugs, so that was useless to me, and I wasn't into politics. There wasn't really much that I wasn't into back then, so I was disappointed. The only reason I kept exploring was my sheer desire to experience the world that I thought existed on the deep web. That world was darker than any drug site, the world that had murder, torture, messed up porn for messed up people, and all sorts of nasty shit. I eventually got my wish. Just when my apathy towards the deep web got to its highest point, I found what I was looking for. The site didn't have a name. I thought it was a broken link for a bit, since it only led me to a black screen. But right before I could click out, a chat box appeared on the screen. Someone using the name admin typed in the chat box saying, "Congrats, you found the worst place on the internet." I stared at the screen, more bemused than afraid, and it took me a moment to type back. "Cool," that's all I said. What else was there to say? Like, I'm here to see your finest torture porn? A moment after, the admin replied, You want in? I hesitated, all those horror stories flooding back into my head, but it was too late to chicken out. This was what I came for. Even if I just clicked out the first sign of danger, I had to see what was there. I had to break the monotony. I had to know. And I hastily typed back, not allowing myself to stop. Yeah. The chat box closed, and I was led directly to what looked like a video, with another chat box next to it. There were around 5 other people there, each eagerly waiting for something. The video was in black and white and showed a small room, and the only thing inside was a wooden chair, until after around 5 minutes of waiting, the door to the room opened and a man was shoved inside, blindfolded and naked, save for a pair of black briefs, and he was followed by a woman, this one dressed all in black and her face covered by a mask. In an instant, the chat room went wild. I almost closed the window to spare myself, knowing immediately where this was going. But again, I told myself that this was what I wanted. Maybe not the torture, but the window into the very worst parts of the world. A woman pulled a knife from her pocket and cut off the man's blindfold as she shoved him into the chair. He didn't struggle for a moment, and once his eyes were visible, I could see why. It looked like he had been drugged. Resisting was impossible, and I frowned, glancing to the side. This was messed up. I knew this was messed up. My conscience told me to call the cops or at least to click out, but I forced myself to watch. She turned to the camera, pointing the knife at the man's throat. One of the people in the chat typed, "One of the fingers! Cut off one of his fingers!" I clenched my hands into fists, taking in a sharp breath. Was this really happening? Was I gonna just watch as this guy got mutilated, as a small crowd of people watched in glee? I felt like throwing up, a feeling that only worsened when the woman nodded and turned to the man, grabbing his limp hand and carefully slicing off one of his fingers. Blood spurted from the wound and the man moaned in pain, but he couldn't fight back. Breathing heavily, I hovered my cursor over the axe, planning on getting the hell out of there. But I didn't. The woman looked unimpressed, as if she thought the people in chat could do better. Another person called for a slice of the man's arm, and she complied. He was bleeding heavily now, clearly in deep pain. But these people were sick. They were cheering her on from chat, suggesting new and painful tortures for her to inflict. And eventually, I stopped breathing heavily. I stopped feeling sick. It was starting to grow on me. By the end, the man was on the ground, covered in blood and breathing heavily. I watched this for around half a minute. The people in the chat were starting to die down. They'd inflicted enough pain, and they had their fun. It seemed like things were wrapping up. Funny, I thought, how it was over, just when I was getting into it. I smirked. This was exciting. This was better than any game that I could play, much better than any class that I could attend, better than sitting with a group of nobodies pretending like I cared for a goddamn second about them. This was the world I wanted to see. This was darkness. This was the underbelly. This was reality. End him. Slit his throat. I type in chat for the first time. She nodded, for one last time, bringing the man to his feet before slowly dragging her blade across his throat, sending more of his blood spreading out. Once it was done, she dropped him, and he fell to the ground limp. He was dead. The people in the chat started complimenting the torturer, talking about how it had been another good time, starting to set a date for the next showing. And on screen, the woman left the room, leaving the corpse behind. Of course, I hastily wrote down the date for the next showing. This was going to be part of my life now. I was going to be part of something bigger. I was going to command these people's death. What a rush. So yeah, I still love the deep web. I'm in college now, and now I'm even more immersed in the deep web. I have seen shit some people would freak out just knowing exists. I've fucked around every sick porn site known to man, and I've finally broken the monotony of life. Inspirational, right? How one high schooler defies the boredom inherent in his life by discovering his true passion. I love the deep web.
I entered an auction house on the dark web and found Myself for Sale by u/Dr. Horrible-26. During my first year of college, I was introduced to the Tor browser by my new roommate, Ricky. Those of you who have been around the internet for long enough know Tor is a browser engine used to help you access the dark web, to which we frequently did. For a barely 20-year-old dude experiencing his first moments of living away from home, being handed a way to access nearly whatever I wanted just from the press of a few keys, felt like being handed absolute freedom. While we mostly used it for accessing pirated games and films, or maybe visiting a banned website, there were times I found myself on the more twisted side of it all. I've honestly seen some pretty fucked up shit that I really didn't want or need to see, other than to satisfy my morbid curiosity of if it would be possible to even reach those places. Well, I mostly regret these deeper dives into the dark web. One such dive might have very well saved my life. It was about 2 a.m. on a Friday, during the end of my third year of college, and Ricky had been spending the night at her cousin's house, leaving me to myself. I'd been scrolling through the web, going through various shady movie sites and running games I didn't technically own, when I got a strange pop-up ad.
One-time auction, limited items, one of a kind. Get now or never again. Don't miss out on these items.
It read in a flashing red and green Comic Sans font. Now, I've gone to a few of these dark web auctions, even participated in a few out of impulse bidding on things that triggered something in my dumb college dude brain. This ranged from things like overly engraved gold handguns you would see Tony Montana strapping, 2 pounds of the finest weed grown in the purest soils of Jamaica, just to give me that little adrenaline rush of, dude, what if I actually get it? Granted, I only ever bid 10, maybe $20 tops. Knowing actually winning any of it would probably land me behind bars. I wasn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, and would have been busted within minutes of receiving the package. This one would be different, however. I decided I'd check out the auction and clicked on the link before browsing through the bids. At first, it wasn't anything serious, mostly firearms and drugs. Typical black web catalogue. As I moved down the list, the items got more extreme. Much more extreme. The list started with simple low-caliber handguns you could get at Walmart in some states, but quickly changed to sniper rifles and LMGs fit for military elites, till I was eventually being offered small nuclear explosives, claiming to have enough power to level small towns to ash and brimstone. Super strong pot and funny mushrooms quickly turned to advertisements for pounds of Colombian cocaine, to 10-pound boxes of fentanyl pills. Shadiest of all were what I assume are experimental drugs. Black and yellow sludge-like substances, held in test tubes that didn't even have real names. Just things like XT parentheses 1 and B8 plus asterisk RVV1 /dash. Judging by the descriptions, these things fry your brain considering the people selling it explain the effects through mostly incoherent, barely understandable sentences implying they've been indulging in their own supply. I remember one going along the lines of, fun green bubbles. When super cool if eaten, it's like green, blue, green bubbles. They fly up, eat up, fly down with the green bubbles. I might be paraphrasing on that, but trust me, it wouldn't have made any more sense than if I did get it spot on. Eventually, I reached what I took to be the hitman and murderer catalogue. Poison brews of ricin and cyanide, claiming to have zero scent or taste. Soundproof sneakers, weapon silencers, fake aliases, passports. People were even selling codes that were apparently instructions on how to get to areas in your location where bodies are most often hidden and never found. There were other codes that were labeled how-to instructional tapes made by professionals on how to get away with various types of crime, even murders. If you didn't want to do the work yourself, you could buy the phone number to a top-class hitman near you who will make sure your job is done effectively. Things only got worse when I scrolled to the next page to see photos of people, some even children, with their names listed underneath. They were advertising human trafficking and giving each of their products a small biography of sorts, as if they were stat cards. It listed everything from addresses to allergies, strengths, weaknesses, even down to daily routine. Now, I've seen these kinds of black room type things and was well aware of how sick people can be on the dark web, but seeing it never gets any less unsettling, especially reading some of the things these bidders wanted to do with their product once they got their hands on them. This unsettlement quickly turned to unimaginable, agonizing fear as I scrolled down to see my own portrait, one taken on my first day of college. I began to panic as I read off my card. Whoever these people were, they knew my name, age, race, height, weight, even down to my small birthmark behind my ear. Not only that, but they seemed to have known my whole life story from birth. My panic only grew wider as I saw there were already 4 bidders, the highest of which bidding almost 15 grand. The sickest part was these bidders left comments. Things like,
"He'd fit well with my collection. I can't wait to have his body. I wish to taste his skin."
Along with a slew of horrible deranged shit they wanted to do with me that I really don't want to repeat. I fell back and began to hyperventilate. It felt like my heart was going to give out and my brain was going to explode, thinking of all the horrible things that may happen to me at the hands of these sick, twisted people who looked to take ownership of my life. Most of the rest of the night was a blur. I remember bidding 20k off the bat to top the list, then periodically bidding, I think, another 3 what felt like every 30 minutes, till I reached almost 40k. After that I must have blacked out because the next thing I remember was waking up curled in a ball under my desk in a puddle of cold sweat. It was still dark out, so the flashing lights coming from my monitor were all too noticeable. I could feel myself shaking in fear as I slowly crawled out from under the desk, before slowly looking at my screen and seeing in large red Comic Sans,
"Congratulations, you win. Please list where you'd like to send your prize. We will send an agent to deliver your package."
I felt an overwhelming amount of relief wash over my body, seeing I had just bought myself. Sure, I ended up putting myself in near debt before I've even finished school, but I'm alive and free. Knowing those vile fucks wouldn't be able to live out their fantasies was enough for me to forget about any possible money problems. I think I even started laughing like a madman for a second. As I entered, "Leave them be. I bought them their freedom so they don't suffer," hoping that'd be enough explanation. And thankfully it was, as I was answered rather quickly with another message.
"Understood. Your product will be removed from all auctions and marked as sold. Thank you for your purchase, Evan."
Reading that caused me to nearly collapse as if all the stress and tension built up drained from my body, only to quickly return as I reread the message. They knew I just bit on myself. They were still fucking watching. The next couple of months were a living hell of paranoia and anxiety. I tried to explain what I could to Ricky, and he did his best to help calm me down, but it was fruitless. Eventually though, after enough time, I was able to move on from it. More so, I think my mind forced me to block it out. But it's all come back now, thanks to an email I had just received from Ricky almost 8 years after that night. Please help. I don't have the money to go up against the highest bidder. I responded as quickly as possible, asking for him to send me his PayPal or something. That was 2 days ago. I haven't gotten a response. I think he lost the auction.
I ordered contact lenses from the dark web. It was the worst decision I ever made. By u/eekpeek. A few months ago, my best friend Jeremy called and asked if he could come over. He told me about this crazy new site of the internet that he had found. I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. He was always up to something mischievous though, even as an adult. He still had the enthusiasm of a child when he became excited. Because of that, it was always hard to tell him no. I could tell that this seemed important to him, so I told him to just come over and show me what the hell he was talking about. He came over to my house later the same day. He showed up with a flash drive, and he was so excited, he didn't even take off his shoes. He ran over to my already open laptop that was sitting on my living room table and immediately plugged the flash drive in. He had that obnoxious smile across his face. It was the same smile he made when we were kids. The same taunting grin he made right before we were about to do something that our parents would be furious about. So much for saying hello. You should really knock first. What if I was naked? My voice was playful. Oh, shut up and come sit down. Oh, and I'm sorry for barging in like that, he said just as playfully. Whatever. You're definitely not sorry. I'm going to make us some tea. I'll be right out. I smiled as I walked away. Around 10 minutes later, I came back in with 2 mugs full of freshly brewed tea. I sat the tea down on the table in front of my couch and sat down next to Jeremy. I looked over at my laptop, my eyes immediately fixated on the screen. The flash drive contained a whole different operating system, and I watched my laptop boot up and start running an operating system that I had never even seen before. My eyes then shot their gaze at Jeremy. What the hell is this? Is this going to mess up my computer? You know I can't afford another one if this one breaks. Most importantly, I need it for school. All of my schoolwork is in there. My voice was sharp, but before I could finish talking, he cut me off. You worry too much. Just relax. I tested out on my computer, and everything went fine. Just wait for it to boot up. Your computer will return to normal once I power it down and then remove the flash drive. His voice had a reassuring tone. Yeah, whatever, fine, I said reluctantly. After about 10 more minutes of us just sitting there watching this foreign operating system load, it finally finished. The home screen was a solid shape of blue, and there were only 2 icons. One was a web browser, and the other one was some sort of VPN. In the corner was a search bar, and I tried typing all kinds of words in it, but nothing came up. Eventually, after I was done clicking around, Jeremy took over the controls. He opened up a web browser, It was a search engine that I had never even seen before. Actually, it was a search engine that I never even heard of. And I watched him manically type in random numbers and letters into the search engine. Before I could even ask what he was doing, he hit enter and a Wikipedia page came up. Towards the middle of the page was a list of links. They all had different names. The credit card company, Guns Are Great, and the one-stop shop were the names of some of the links. Most links had extremely illegal titles and definitely led to illegal activities. Some of them were just downright disgusting and disturbing that I'd rather not go into detail about those links. Jeremy quickly identified what he was looking for. It was a link called The Gore Store. He was always into that kind of stuff. I never understood why. Gore was just fascinating to him. I myself could not say the same. It had to have been fake anyways, right? I just wanted to get it over with, so I sat quietly and waited for the page to load. Once it loaded, my screen was filled with obscene images of mutilated bodies. They were videos of different people getting killed in different ways. It was insanely graphic. He showed me 2 30-second clips before I had to run to the bathroom. And I could hear Jeremy's laughter as I viciously gagged over my toilet. When I came out of the bathroom, the Gore page was gone, and he was back on the Wikipedia page. I watched his eyes dart around the screen. It looked like he was trying to find something in particular. And before I could ask what he was doing, he let out, "Aha!" "What is it?" "I'm not sure if this whole dark web thing is for me. Maybe we should just turn it off." Before I could even finish my sentence, he cut me off again. "Look what I found. It's pretty cool. I think you'll actually like it," he said confidently. I reluctantly agreed and sat back down on the couch beside him. The computer cursor was hovered over a link simply named Eyes. I was convinced it was about to be the most nauseating thing in the world, a picture of dangling eyeballs or blood-filled eye sockets. It had to be something along those lines. He could tell that I was unprepared, and he immediately clicked the button after I gave a slight nod of approval. I was not expecting what I saw. They were eyes, all right. Normal eyes. It looked like a business page for selling contacts. It appeared professional, and there was nothing strange about it, except for the fact that the seemingly normal business page was on the dark web. I had to look through their selection and ended up asking Jeremy to buy me a pair. He already had the correct form of currency in some sort of account, and he thought it was funny, of course, and bought them without a second thought. I thanked him, and we talked about what they were going to look like, and we were both excited. After Jeremy left that night, he took the flash drive with him, and he explained that he was going away on a business trip and wouldn't be back for a week or 2. He said that he sent the package directly to my house, but to call him if there were any delivery issues. The estimated arrival date was 3 weeks from that time anyways, and I figured he would be back by then. That way, we could experience unboxing them and me struggling to put them in together. He did find the website and pay for them after all. 2 days later, I was surprised when I opened my front door to get the mail and saw a package at my front door. I quickly got the mail and took the package inside. I remember thinking, these couldn't be the contacts. It was way too early. But I grabbed a box cutter from the kitchen and I started to slice open the package. There they were. The bright green contacts that had a slight blue fade were in that little box. They were beautiful, and I know I told Jeremy that I would wait, but I was too excited. I took them out of the box and soaked them in the contact solution that came with the package. I looked in the mirror at my dark brown eyes while the contact sat in the solution. I smiled at the fact that my eyes were about to be a completely different color, even if it was only temporarily. I always wanted brighter eyes. I had never put in contacts before, so I expected it to be quite tricky for my first try. To my surprise, I put both of them in with quite ease. It's safe to say that I gave myself a pat on the back. I was thoroughly impressed. It was like I had been doing this all of my life. They slid right into place and didn't budge or slide at all. After looking in the mirror for who knows how long, I decided to call Jeremy and tell him about it. He didn't answer. I figured he was probably working and he would eventually call me back. When he didn't pick up, I looked back into the mirror, stunned by my new eye color, and I started taking pictures to update my social platforms. We can say my self-esteem skyrocketed. When I was done obsessing over my new contacts, I decided that I should probably make dinner. I lived by myself and I always made way too much food. I'd used the leftovers for lunch, so it never really went to waste. That night, I decided to make a whole lasagna. It was one of my favorite meals and I figured that I could give some to my elderly neighbor as well. I put a pot of water on the stove to bring it to a boil, and as I was pulling out the noodles, something caught my eye. It was like a quick shadow flew by my peripheral vision. I stopped and looked around, but I saw nothing. I remember thinking it was strange, but not uncommon. I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. I finished prepping and I lined the cooked noodles on a sheet of aluminum foil. I opened up a package of raw meat to cook in an already hot pan, and as I went to open the meat, I glanced over at the noodles, and this time I was looking straight at them, and a wave of horror washed over my face. The noodles had turned into maggots. They were squirming all over the aluminum foil, and I watched as some of them wiggled themselves off of the counter. Each time one hit the ground, I flinched, and they were big. They were about as big as the top part of a pointer finger. I grabbed the broom and the garbage can, and I swept them all into the garbage. I took it outside to the garbage bin immediately. After that, I had completely lost my appetite. I decided that I needed to take a bath to try to calm down and recollect my thoughts. I made some tea, lit some candles, and filled the bathtub. I slowly got into the bath as the hot water touched my skin. It was quiet and peaceful. I finally had the time to think. I closed my eyes and let my head rest against the back of the tub. What just happened? I'm definitely not seeing things. Those maggots were real. How in the world did my freshly boiled noodles turn into maggots? It doesn't make any sense. I whispered my thoughts aloud. When I opened my eyes to gaze at the relaxing setup that I had put together, I jumped out of the water. The bath water was a deep shade of red now, and every candle I had lit had went out. I quickly wrapped myself in a towel and turned the main light on. The candles weren't lit, but the water was clear again. I didn't care. I wasn't going back in there. I dried myself off and put on fresh clothes. I went back into the bathroom to brush my teeth and hair before bed. I turned on the sink and grabbed my toothbrush. But right before I start brushing my teeth, I looked up into the mirror and I felt a knot form in my stomach. I was holding the toothbrush in my mouth, but my reflection wasn't. I watched my reflection sway back and forth, and the closer I leaned in, the farther my reflection would back up. It giggled as I watched my own reflection tear out my eyeballs. My reflection's eyes were dangling so low that they touched its mouth. It licked one of the eyeballs, and one of the contacts flipped on its tongue. It started to chew it like it was food. Each chew sounded like broken pieces of plastic. Watching blood start to fall from my reflection's eyes, I couldn't take it anymore. I washed out my mouth and I ran back into my bedroom. I sat down at my vanity and tried to take out the contacts without looking into the mirror. I thought they would be easy to remove since they were so easy to put in. I was wrong. No matter what I did, they wouldn't budge. Not even a little bit. I tried pinching it, moving it, pushing and sliding it. Nothing. After 30 minutes of nothing but severely irritating my eye, I gave up. I straightened my neck from my bent-over position, and I looked in my vanity mirror. My reflection was laughing at me. I covered all the mirrors in my house until I could figure out some way to get these things out of my eyes. They were a pretty natural color, so if I went out in public, nobody would even notice that I had contacts stuck in my eyes. I was also skeptical to call a doctor at that time, considering I received these contacts from the dark web. I decided to try and rationalize things. I realized I sure didn't want to sleep with them in, so I'd have to stay awake as long as possible until I found a solution. I went into my living room to watch TV. It was the only place in my house where I couldn't see myself in some way. And my house looked slightly abandoned. I had blankets draped over anything that could cause a reflection. I leaned forward to grab the remote which had fallen on the floor, and upon picking it up, I felt a sharp pain throughout my entire hand. I immediately dropped the remote and looked at my aching palm. Every inch of my hand was riddled in cuts. I watched the blood drip from my hand and onto the floor. I looked down to find the remote on the ground still. The button stuck out and came to a sharp point. They were sharper than any newly opened razor. I kicked the remote as hard as I could, and I heard it crash against the wall and hit the floor. With my head and hands, I heard the television turn on. It was playing a show that I couldn't recognize. I lifted my head and looked towards the television. It was me. I was on my own television. The quality was grainy, but I could make out what was happening. The television showed me walking across the street from the local grocery store. On my way across the road, a huge truck came at full speed, and in a blink of an eye, the truck hit me, and I watched my lifeless body drag against the sidewalk. Then it turned back off. I didn't know what to do. I was scrambling around, trying to figure something out. I ended up calling Jeremy. He seemed a bit confused, and honestly, it didn't even sound like he believed me. It's like he thought that I was joking around, and he ended up just hanging up on me, thinking that I was pranking him. When I hung up my phone, I slammed it down on the hallway floor. I have been sitting there ever since the television situation. Tears filled my eyes as I heard my phone vibrate against the wooden floor. I picked up my phone and saw it was a text message from an unknown number.
Go outside
is all it read. I tried calling the number back. Of course, that didn't work, considering there was no number to begin with. The caller ID just said, unknown. At this point, I was trying everything. What more did I have to lose? I walked past my kitchen and glanced over at a bowl of fruit that I kept on the counter. They were all black and rotten. I didn't stop though. I just wanted to make it to my front door. I didn't plan on actually fully going outside, but a peek wouldn't hurt. At least, that's what I thought. And before I could put my hand on the doorknob, someone started knocking.
Package delivery.
The voice was deep and foreign. I opened up my door just a tad, and there stood a delivery man. His eyes were wide, really wide. They looked dry, like he hadn't blinked in hours. He had slash wounds across his entire face and down his neck, and he was incredibly lanky and tall. He reached out his arm to hand me the package, and I realized he was missing 6 fingers. The wounds looked incredibly fresh, and blood soiled the entire box. "Just leave it there, I'll get it," I said quickly. I slammed the door in his face and locked every single door in my house that led to the outside. Once I was sure he was gone, I quickly grabbed the package and pulled it in my house. Everything around me was slowly decaying, even the people outside. I eventually made my way back to my room. My stairs were now littered with nails sticking directly upwards. I tried to avoid as many as I could, but I still stabbed the bottom of my feet multiple times. There were countless bloody holes in my feet, and I left a crimson trail wherever I walked. I walked into the bathroom that was connected to the bedroom once more. I pulled off the cover and looked at myself again. This time, my reflection was still laughing, but pieces of flesh dangled from different areas of my face. My neck was snapped, and I had a noose around my neck. My tongue salivated black-looking tar, and my eyes were now completely hollowed out. I haven't slept in 3 days. I'm afraid of going to sleep. What if I wake up and my entire house is embedded in barbed wire? What if my floor is completely made out of shards of glass? What if everything around me turns into an ultimate death trap? I am absolutely terrified. I'm not taking any chances, especially since I brought the box inside and I ended up opening it. There was another box inside, and this box was slightly cleaner, but had a message scratched along the top. It was barely legible, but it read,
Open to find out when your untimely demise will fall upon you. Clocks ticking.
Again, I had figured that I had nothing to lose, so I opened the second box. And this time, the box contained a handwritten note.
Not all eyes are meant to be a prize. The context you contain will show the other side. You can live with this vision or choose your demise. I left you a gift. Now, you can decide.
I've been sitting here for hours now, and all my food is maggot infested and moldy. I need to go to the grocery store, but I kept looking at the gift that sat below the note. I never really thought that this would be an appropriate gift for anyone, but I can't help but gaze at this already tied noose. I knew going on the dark web was a bad idea. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons. my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.